Vows and Vendettas. The wedding was perfect. The sun dipped behind the rolling hills, casting a golden glow over the vineyard, the air rich with the scent of lavender and wine. Sophie stood at the altar, her heart pounding with nervous excitement, staring into the adoring eyes of the man she was about to marry, Ethan Carter, the love of her life. As the officiant spoke the words, "If anyone has reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." A chilling voice shattered the serenity. "I do." Gasps rippled through the guests. Sophie's stomach twisted as an older woman, impeccably dressed, stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Ethan with an unreadable expression. Ethan's face paled. "Mom?" Sophie turned to him, confusion tightening her chest. His mother had never been thrilled about their relationship, but she wouldn't ruin their wedding. Would she? "I didn't come here to stop the wedding," the woman said, her voice calm but edged with something dangerous. "But before you exchange vows, Ethan, she deserves to know the truth." "The truth?" Sophie whispered. Ethan's grip on her hands tightened. "Mom, don't!" His mother exhaled sharply, her eyes flickering with pain before settling on Sophie. "Your father, Richard Sinclair, is the reason Ethan's father is dead." The words hung in the air like a curse. The quiet murmurs turned into a rising wave of confusion and shock. Sophie felt the ground shift beneath her. "That's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head. "I wish it weren't," Ethan's mother said. "Richard Sinclair destroyed our family. Your father framed Ethan's for embezzlement, ruined his name, and sent him to prison. He didn't survive it. Ethan grew up without a father because of your family." Sophie turned to Ethan, desperate for him to deny it. But his silence was damning. His jaw clenched, his eyes dark and stormy with emotions he'd never spoken about. "You knew?" she asked, her voice trembling. He exhaled shakily. "I found out months ago." Sophie recoiled, as if she'd been struck. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't want to lose you." His voice cracked. "I love you, Sophie. I didn't care about the past, but I was afraid if you knew we'd never make it to this day." Tears burned Sophie's eyes. The love of her life, the man she trusted most, had kept something this huge from her. And her father, the man she idolized, had caused the deepest wound in Ethan's life. She took a shaky breath, her hands slipping from his grasp. "I don't even know what's real anymore." Ethan reached for her, his voice desperate. "Us, Sophie. We're real." But as she stared at him, her heart breaking, she realized love wasn't the only thing that bound them. So did betrayal, and she didn't know if love was enough to survive it. The courtroom was silent except for the sharp click of Claire's designer heels against the marble floor. Her once confident stride had lost its luster, dulled by the weight of impending doom. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, but no amount of polish could hide the tension in her eyes. She was losing. The evidence I had gathered, meticulously planned, precisely executed, was airtight. Bank statements, phone records, hidden accounts in offshore havens, and even an email trail leading straight to her and David Mercer. They had schemed, manipulated, and stolen, but their greed had made them sloppy. I sat at the plaintiff's table, watching as her lawyer whispered something in her ear. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't look at me. She hadn't since the trial started. David Mercer, once the smug corporate kingpin, was now a ghost of himself. His legal team had cut him loose to save their own reputations, and he sat on the other side of the courtroom, fidgeting, his betrayal of Claire complete. He had turned state's witness to reduce his own sentence, throwing her under the bus in a last-ditch effort to save his skin. I almost admired his cowardice. Almost. As the prosecution presented the final piece of evidence, a wire recording, of Claire confessing her plan to frame me, Her face went pale. "This is fabricated," she hissed, standing abruptly. Her voice cracked, desperate. "Ms. Reynolds, I suggest you sit down," the judge said sternly. She did. But I could see it now. The cracks in her composure, the panic seeping in. She knew it was over. Claire had always believed she was the smartest person in the room, that she could control the game. But she had underestimated me. She thought she had shattered me, that I would drown in my own misery after her betrayal. But I had turned my pain into a weapon, and now she was drowning instead. Claire's downfall 2 weeks later, the verdict was read: guilty on all counts, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted financial sabotage. She faced up to 20 years. She turned to me, her blue eyes burning with hatred and something else, fear. "You did this to me," she spat, as they prepared to take her away. "No, Claire, I," said, standing over her. "You did this to yourself." As she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the weight on my chest finally lifted. She was finished. David Mercer wouldn't walk away unscathed either. His reputation was destroyed, his empire crumbling, and his plea deal wouldn't erase the damage he had done to himself. But as I stepped outside, feeling the sun on my face for the first time in what felt like years, I realized revenge had never been about ruining them. It had been about reclaiming myself, and I had won. Would you like me to continue with Claire's prison arc and her desperate attempts to escape justice? Or would you like the focus to shift toward the protagonist, rebuilding his life? Revenge for Betrayal, Chapter 16. The investigation hiring a lawyer wasn't just about the divorce. It was about war. Claire had played her game well, manipulating me, lying to my face, and making me believe in a marriage built on deceit. But now I was playing my game, and I played to win. I chose Daniel Hawthorne, a sharp, ruthless attorney with a reputation for tearing apart liars in court. He specialized in high-stakes divorces and corporate fraud. A perfect match for what I needed. "Mr. Reynolds," he greeted me as I stepped into his office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a cold, clinical feel. "I understand. You're looking for something more than a standard divorce attorney." I sat down across from him, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were the initial findings from the private investigator I had hired before coming to him. Hotel receipts, burner phone records, and a few blurry photos of Claire with David Mercer. "This is just the surface," I said. "I want everything. I want to know how long this has been going on, how much she's stolen from me, and what else she's hiding." Hawthorne flipped through the files, nodding slightly. "You don't just want a divorce, you want to destroy her." I leaned back, in my chair. "I want justice." His lips curled into a small, knowing smirk. "Then let's get to work." Digging deeper, Hawthorne wasted no time assembling his team: financial analysts, forensic accountants, and digital security experts. Within a week, they found more than I expected. Claire hadn't just cheated, she had funneled money into secret accounts, laundering funds through shell companies tied to Mercer. She had signed fraudulent contracts in my name, shifting assets under the radar. She had been planning my downfall long before I ever suspected her betrayal. "She was setting you up," Hawthorne said, tossing a document onto his desk. "If you hadn't caught on, she would have drained your finances, left you with nothing, and walked away clean." I clenched my jaw. I had known she was ruthless, but this was something else. "Can we prove it?" I asked, my voice cold. "Oh, we can prove everything," Hawthorne assured me. "With this, we don't just win the divorce, we can press criminal charges." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of it all. Claire had been playing with fire, believing she was untouchable. Now she was about to burn, setting the trap we didn't. Confront her immediately. Instead, we fed her false information, making her think I was too devastated to fight back. She believed she was in control, that I would roll over and accept defeat. She had no idea what was coming. Hawthorne arranged for a fake settlement meeting where Claire expected to walk away with a hefty financial win. Instead, she walked into a room filled with evidence of her crimes. She sat across from me, still radiating arrogance, but as Hawthorne laid out document after document, financial fraud, embezzlement, proof of infidelity, her confidence cracked. "You didn't think I'd just let you walk away, did you?" I said, watching her face pale. She opened her mouth, but for once, Claire had nothing to say. "You have two options," Hawthorne said smoothly. "Settle quietly, forfeit everything, or we take this to court, and you go to prison." Claire's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. For the first time, she looked afraid. I leaned in slightly. Checkmate. She had played her game. Now it was my turn to end it. "Would you like to continue with Claire's reaction and the legal battle, or do you want to fast forward to her downfall?" Unmasking the truth, Claire always believed she was untouchable. She thought she could lie, manipulate, and walk away unscathed. But she underestimated me. And now, with Daniel Hawthorne leading the charge, I was about to dismantle everything she had built on deception. The investigation had already revealed her affair with David Mercer, the secret bank accounts, and the fraudulent contracts. But Hawthorne wasn't satisfied yet. "We're missing something," he said one evening, tapping his pen against his desk. "Claire's careful, too careful. The fact that she got sloppy near the end means there's something bigger." I frowned. "Bigger than using me as a financial scapegoat?" He nodded. "I want to know why she risked so much. She was winning. She had access to your accounts. She was siphoning money, and she was poised to walk away rich. But then she got reckless." Hawthorne had a point. Claire didn't take unnecessary risks, unless she was desperate. So we kept digging, and then we found it. The second affair, it wasn't just Mercer. Claire had been seeing someone else, a name that sent a cold wave of fury through me. Jonathan Pierce, my former business partner. The man I had trusted like a brother. The pieces clicked into place. Mercer had been the financial muscle, but Pierce? He was the strategist, the one who knew exactly how to dismantle me from the inside. They had been working together. Hawthorne looked up from the files, exhaling sharply. "This wasn't just about the money, Mr. Reynolds. They were planning to destroy you completely. Claire was going to frame you for Mercer's financial crimes, and Pierce was positioning himself to take over your company once you were ruined." A slow, burning rage settled in my chest. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated annihilation, and it was time to turn the tables. Setting the perfect trap, we needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable evidence that would bury them both. That's when Hawthorne suggested something ruthless. "Let's make Claire think she still has the upper hand," he said. "If she believes you're still vulnerable, she'll make a mistake. And when she does, we'll be waiting." So I played my part. I acted broken, drinking more, skipping work, sending her desperate messages about fixing things. Claire took the bait, probably reveling in what she thought was my downfall. Then, one evening, she slipped up. A private meeting at a luxury hotel. Claire, Mercer, and Pierce. Hawthorne's team was already watching. Inside the penthouse suite, the three of them discussed their final move. How Claire would push for the divorce, take a large settlement, and ensure I was too legally crippled to fight back. That's when Pierce leaned in, smirking. "Once he's out of the picture, it's all ours." The words were captured on hidden cameras, audio recordings, and witness testimonies. Claire's fate was sealed. The confrontation. The next morning, I called Claire to meet for coffee. She arrived, exuding the same smug confidence she always carried. "Change of heart?" she asked, sipping her latte. I smiled. "Something like that." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were transcripts of her conversations, bank records, and proof of her conspiracy with Pierce and Mercer. Her smile faded. "What? "What is this?" she whispered. I leaned forward. "This is everything, Claire. Your affair, your crimes, your little plan with Pierce. It's over." She looked up at me, panic flickering in her blue eyes. I outplayed you," I said simply. "And now, you have two choices. Sign over everything and disappear, or face the legal consequences." Her hands shook as she gripped the folder. "You wouldn't," I smirked. "Try me." Claire had spent years scheming against me. But in the end, she never saw me coming. Would you like to continue with Claire's reaction, her downfall, or the next phase of revenge against Mercer and Pierce? Building the case, Hawthorne wasted no time. The moment I handed him my suspicions, he moved with brutal efficiency. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a predator in a tailored suit, the kind of man who dismantled opponents before they even realized. They were playing the game. "Infidelity is just the start," he told me, his sharp eyes scanning the evidence I had collected. Hotel receipts, late-night call logs, and credit card statements showing Claire's secret rendezvous. "But we need leverage. If we can prove she used marital assets for her affair, we can bleed her dry in court." I nodded. "What do you need from me?" Hawthorne smirked. "Patience, and trust that I know how to take her apart." So I let him work. Following the money within, a week, Hawthorne's team uncovered more than I could have imagined. Claire hadn't just cheated. She had funded her affair with our money. A forensic accountant traced thousands of dollars funneled from our joint accounts to a hidden fund. Under her name, lavish hotel stays, designer gifts, even a private vacation villa in the Maldives, one I had never even heard of. But the real kicker? She had been planning to divorce me for months. Emails between Claire and her lover, David Mercer, painted the full picture. She wasn't just betraying me personally. She had been quietly siphoning assets, ensuring that by the time she left, I'd be left with nothing. "She wanted to gut you financially before she walked away," Hawthorne said, tossing a printout onto his desk. "She played the long game, but now she's running out of moves." I clenched my fists, my pulse pounding. She thought she could outmaneuver me. She thought she had already won. She had no idea I was just getting started. The private investigators break through. Hawthorne and I weren't the only ones watching Claire. I had hired a private investigator, Nathan Cross, a former detective with a reputation for uncovering the dirtiest secrets. He followed Claire's every move, documenting her meetings, tracking her burner phone calls, and, most importantly, identifying who else was involved. One night, Cross called me. "You're going to want to see this," he said, his voice thick with amusement. He sent me photos and surveillance footage. Claire and Mercer in a secluded hotel bar. But they weren't alone. Sitting across from them was Jonathan Pierce, my former business partner. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. This wasn't just an affair. This was a conspiracy. Cross confirmed my worst fear. Claire had been working with both Mercer and Pierce to destroy me. Setting the trap with Hawthorne's legal expertise and Cross's surveillance, I had everything I needed. Now it was time to make my move. I scheduled a fake settlement meeting at Claire's favorite upscale restaurant, an intimate setting where she would feel comfortable, where she would believe she was in control. She arrived dressed in a sleek black dress, confident, smug. She thought she was here to finalize her victory, to discuss terms of separation, where she walked away with everything. She had no idea I had already gutted her from the inside. Hawthorne laid out the evidence. Proof of her infidelity. Documentation of her financial fraud, her hidden assets, evidence of her conspiracy with Mercer and Pierce. Claire's face drained of color as each document was placed in front of her. "What? What is this?" she stammered. Hawthorne leaned back, smirking. "Your future." I finally spoke, my voice calm, steady. Deadly. I know everything, Claire. And now? You're out of options. She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the table. You wouldn't? I leaned in. Watch me. For the first time, Claire looked afraid. She had spent years planning my downfall. Now, she was watching. Her own. Would you like to continue with Claire's reaction, her attempt to escape justice, or the next step in dismantling her and her co-conspirators? The smoking gun finding out Claire had been cheating was one thing. Discovering that my business partner, Jonathan Pierce, was part of it? That was another level of betrayal. Nathan Cross, my private investigator, had been tailing Claire for weeks, digging deeper into her secret meetings. What started as evidence of an affair with David Mercer quickly unraveled into something much darker. One night, Cross called me. His voice was steady, but I could hear the excitement beneath it. Meet me at my office. You need to see this in person. The footage that changed. Everything Cross's office was a small but well-equipped space in the heart of the city. Surveillance. Monitors lined the walls, displaying grainy but unmistakable footage. I watched the screen as Claire sat in a dimly lit hotel bar, Mercer beside her. But what made my stomach churn was the man sitting across from them, Jonathan Pierce. I gritted my teeth as the camera zoomed in, capturing their conversation. Pierce leaned in, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. He won't see it coming, he said, smirking. The moment he signs over control, we cut him off completely. Mercer chuckled, nodding. And when the dust settles, Claire and I will be sitting on a fortune. Claire sipped her wine, eyes glinting with cold amusement. Let's just make sure he's broken enough to agree. The screen froze. I sat in silence, processing what I had just seen. They weren't just sleeping together. They were orchestrating my complete downfall. Claire had been siphoning money for months, working with Pierce to strip me of my business, my finances, my reputation, everything I had built. And when they were done, they would leave me with nothing, except, now, I had them. Turning the tables, Hawthorne was waiting for me when I arrived at his office, the footage in hand. He reviewed it in silence, his expression unreadable. When the video ended, he exhaled slowly. Well, damn, that's airtight. I leaned forward. What's our next move? Hawthorne's lips curled into a smirk. We don't just expose them, we make them destroy each other. He outlined the plan. Claire believed I was still in the dark. We'd let her think she was winning. Mercer was greedy. If pressured, he might turn on Claire to protect himself. Pierce had the most to lose. If he felt cornered, he'd try to cut ties with them both. I wasn't just going to take them down, I was going to make them implode. The confrontation. I arranged a fake business. Meeting at a luxury hotel, one Pierce had frequented, he arrived, confident as ever, expecting to discuss expansion plans. Instead, I laid out everything. The footage, the financial records, the secret emails between him and Claire. His face went pale. This is a setup, he stammered. I smiled coldly. No, Jonathan. This is the end of your career. I gave him one option. Betray Claire and Mercer, or go down with them. And just like that, the alliances shattered. Would you like to continue with Pierce turning against Claire, Claire's desperate reaction, or Mercer's downfall? No escape for Claire. Claire was a fighter. Even after I had stripped her of everything, her money, power, reputation, she refused to accept defeat. For weeks, she tried to find loopholes. She called in favors, tried to contact old friends, even attempted to blackmail Hawthorne into reversing the legal agreements. But every door she knocked on, I had already closed it. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her allies had abandoned her. Her name was synonymous with fraud and scandal. And now, she was desperate. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She tried to run. The trap closes Nathan Cross had been watching her. The moment Claire liquidated the last of her hidden assets, I knew exactly what she was planning. She had booked a one-way flight to Argentina under an alias. She thought she could escape, start over somewhere new, disappear before the legal consequences. Caught up to her. I wasn't going to let that happen. I made a call. By the time Claire arrived at the airport, they were waiting for her. The arrest. The airport security cameras caught it all. Claire, dressed in an expensive coat, sunglasses covering. Her face wheeling a designer suitcase toward the international terminal. She moved fast, head down, trying not to attract attention. She almost made it to the gate, almost. Then, two plainclothes officers stepped in front of her. One flashed a badge. Claire Reynolds, you're under arrest for financial fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Her face twisted in shock. What? No, this is a mistake. She tried to fight. She tried to talk her way out of it, just like always, but there was no one left to manipulate. No one left to save her. The handcuffs snapped around her wrists. As they led her away, her head jerked up, eyes scanning the terminal, desperate, panicked, and that's when she saw me. I was standing at a distance, watching. She knew, in that moment, that I had orchestrated every second of this. Her lips curled in a snarl, but I just smiled. It was over, for good. David Mercer's final betrayal. The moment Claire was arrested, Mercer turned on her. Facing his own legal trouble, he cut a deal with the prosecutors, agreeing to testify against Claire in exchange for a lighter sentence. He threw her under the bus without hesitation. Their grand romance, their so-called partnership, it meant nothing now. In the courtroom, he sat on the witness stand and exposed every dirty secret. How Claire manipulated me for years. How they orchestrated the financial fraud. How they planned to destroy me and walk away rich. Claire sat at the defense table, her face pale, her nails digging into her palms. She had spent her life controlling everyone around her. Now, she was at their mercy, and no one was coming to save her. The verdict. The trial was swift and brutal. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury didn't even need a full day to deliberate. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent as the judge read. The verdict, guilty on all counts. Claire flinched, but she didn't look at me. She knew I was there. She just refused to give me the satisfaction. The judge continued. Claire Reynolds, you are hereby sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. She inhaled sharply. 10 years. 10 years of prison walls, orange jumpsuits, and no way out. For someone like Claire, it was a fate worse than death. She turned, eyes locking onto me for the first time since the trial started. There was no rage anymore. No arrogance, just pure hatred. I smirked. Game over. The aftermath, Claire was led away in handcuffs, her empire in ruins, her reputation destroyed. David Mercer? He got 3 years in prison, a fraction of what he deserved, but he would never recover. His business was gone, his money drained, and the world knew him as a fraud and a coward. Jonathan Pierce? He disappeared. Word was he fled the country to avoid any further legal trouble. And me? I stood at the top of the world once again. They thought they could destroy me. They thought they could take everything. Instead, I took everything from them, and I never looked back. Epilogue. The final nail in the coffin 6 months later, I received a letter. It was from Claire, sent from prison. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity got the best of me. Inside was a single line scrawled in her elegant handwriting, "You won." But this isn't over, I smirked, tearing the letter in half before tossing it in the fire. Yes, Claire, it is. For good, the end. Ghosts of the past 6 months had passed since Claire was locked away. 6 months since David Mercer's empire crumbled and Jonathan Pierce vanished like a cockroach scattering in the dark. My life should have been back to normal, but some betrayals, leave scars deeper than time can heal, and some enemies, they don't stay buried. A shadow resurfaces one evening. I was in my office overlooking the city skyline, drink in hand. My company was thriving again. My name, once dragged through the mud, was now stronger than ever. But something felt off. Nathan. Cross had been keeping tabs on Claire, making sure she rotted in prison where she belonged. But earlier that day, he left me a voicemail. I played it again, the words chilling despite his usual calm demeanor. Reynolds, we have a problem. Claire's making moves from the inside. Someone's helping her. I put my glass down. Tension creeping into my spine. How? She was finished. She had nothing left unless someone was still protecting her. A familiar name? I called Cross back. He answered on the first ring. What do you have? I asked. There was a pause. Then, Jonathan Pierce. I gripped the phone tighter. That bastard. I should have hunted him down when I had the chance. Cross continued, his tone grim. He's been in Europe, hiding under an alias, but now he's funneling money into an appeal for Claire. I exhaled sharply, fingers curling into a fist. I destroyed him. Cross chuckled darkly. Not enough. The plan, if Pierce wanted to play the long game, I was about to end it. No more loose ends. I spent the next few days pulling every string, using every resource at my disposal. If Pierce was funding Claire, I needed to cut him off permanently. Cross and I tracked his movements. Zurich, Paris, Milan. He was living well, too well for a man who had supposedly lost everything. But money always leaves a trail. And when we followed it, we found exactly what we needed. The final hunt, Jonathan Pierce was staying at an exclusive private resort in Greece, untouchable by normal legal channels, hidden behind layers of offshore accounts. But he wasn't expecting me. I made the flight that night. No lawyers, no negotiations. This time, I was ending it personally. A face-to-face reckoning, I found Pierce at an upscale lounge by the sea, sipping expensive whiskey like he didn't have a care in the world. He didn't see me at first. I took a seat across. From him, watching the moment recognition dawned in his eyes, his smirk faltered. Reynolds. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Miss me? He set his glass down slowly. You've got nerve showing up here. I leaned forward. And you've got no survival instinct. His jaw tightened. I'm just helping. An old friend. I laughed. You're backing the wrong side again, Jonathan. And this time, there's no escape. He exhaled, shaking his head. You think you've won. But Claire, I slammed a folder onto the table. Inside, the proof that would dismantle his last safety net. Every shady transaction, every offshore account, every hidden deal. His fingers hesitated before flipping through the pages. His face paled. This, he swallowed. This isn't possible. I leaned back. It is. And by tomorrow, every government agency that would love to see you in a cell will have a copy. Pierce looked at me, anger flashing in his eyes. You came all this way to threaten me? I smirked. No, I came all this way to finish what you started. I watched as the weight of his downfall settled over him. He had two choices. Disappear, forever, or spend the rest of his life running. Either way, I had won. The end of Jonathan Pierce. By the next morning, Pierce was gone. His assets were seized. His influence, erased. Whatever escape plan he had left, I burned it to the ground. And Claire, without. His funding, her appeal was dead in the water. She would rot in that prison for the next decade, maybe longer. No more threats. No more betrayals. No more Claire. Epilogue. A life reclaimed back in the city, I stood in my office once again, staring out over the skyline. The ghosts of the past had been exorcised. The people who tried to destroy me were nothing but ruins. And me? I was stronger than ever. A new chapter had begun. One without Claire, one without betrayal, one where I made the rules. I poured myself a drink, savoring the taste of victory. For the first time in years, I was finally free. The end. A new beginning. The weight of the past still lingered, but now it was more of a memory, one I could finally push aside. As I walked through the halls of my office building, the world outside seemed brighter, cleaner. The darkness had been purged, and in its place, there was nothing but opportunity. Claire, Mercer, Pierce, they were gone, their legacies shattered. But the victory didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. Sure, I had destroyed the people who betrayed me. I had secured my place atop this empire, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The temptation of new power. The company had been thriving, my name synonymous with success and resilience. But the new power I wielded, control, influence, and wealth, began to feel like a double-edged sword. I found myself drawn to new challenges, new adversaries. There was a quiet hunger that had been unleashed, one I hadn't expected. Cross had told me countless times to keep my distance from the underworld of dirty money, power games, and shadow deals. He warned that I could lose everything if I let greed take over. But the taste of it was addicting. A dangerous proposition. One evening, after a long day of meetings and strategy sessions, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered, not expecting anything out of the ordinary, but the voice on the other end immediately caught my attention. Mr. Reynolds, we have a proposition for you. I recognized the voice, but it took a moment for the pieces to fall into place. It was Diana, Pierce, Jonathan Pierce's estranged daughter. The same woman who had remained in the shadows while her father's empire crumbled. Diana, I said, my voice steady but curious. You and my father have a history, don't you? Her voice was calm, almost cold. I leaned back in my chair, eyeing the skyline through my window. That's putting it lightly. Diana's laugh was sharp. I want you to join me, she said, her tone turning serious. We can rebuild what my father lost, and more. I didn't respond immediately. She was offering me something dangerous, something that had the potential to be bigger than anything I had ever dreamed of. Why me? I asked, testing the waters. She didn't hesitate. Because you're smarter than everyone else. You know how to play the game. I felt a rush of temptation, the pull of an empire I could control, untouched by the past mistakes. A chance to start, anew without the weight of old grudges. But it wasn't just power she was offering. It was something more dangerous. I could see it in her voice. She was playing a game, and I wasn't sure if I was her pawn or her partner. A deal with the devil. Thought of Claire, of all the schemes and betrayals that had brought me here. I thought of Mercer, of Pierce, and how they had tried to break me. But now, standing at the edge of new power, I couldn't help but wonder, could this be the ultimate test? Could I control the power this time, without letting it destroy me? Took the bait. I'm listening, I said, my voice betraying no hesitation. Diana's tone was suddenly warmer, like a predator circling her prey. Good. I knew you'd come around. Meet me tomorrow night. You'll have all the details then. She hung up, and for the first time in months, I felt a rush of anticipation. The night of reckoning arrived at a private club, a location chosen by Diana herself. It was discreet, guarded, a world apart from the one I had left behind. Diana was already waiting at a secluded table in the back, a glass of wine in her hand, her eyes sharp. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I'm not interested in rebuilding my father's empire from the ground up. I want more. I want to take control of the entire network, the people he left behind, the deals he made, the allies he betrayed. And I know you're the only person who can make that happen. Her gaze was unwavering, like she already knew how this would play out. She was playing the long game, just like her father had. I stared at her, wondering how much of her father's ruthlessness she had inherited. "You're offering me a chance to rebuild the empire," I said slowly. "But what's your stake? In it? Why do you want this?" Diana smiled, but it was a smile that held no warmth. "Because I'm the one who should have inherited it, not my father." And just like that, I realized what she was truly offering: control. The chance to rewrite the rules of this dark, dangerous game we had all been playing. The choice. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "You know how this works. We'll need to take down the right people, erase the ones who stand in our way. And once we have control of the money, the power, the connections, we can reshape the world however we want." I couldn't deny the temptation. I had seen what she was capable of, what her father had been capable of. I had played the game before, and I had the scars to prove it. But could I trust her? I thought back to everything that had led me to this moment: the lies, the betrayal, the people who thought they could control me. Maybe Diana Pierce wasn't the enemy after all. Maybe she was my key to controlling the game once and for all. But deep down, I knew that once I crossed this line, there would be no turning back. I took a deep breath, staring into her cold, calculating eyes. "I'm in," I said. "To be continued. Would you like to explore the dark world of power and manipulation Diana Pierce is trying to create, or delve deeper into the consequences of embracing this new path? The dark world of power." The decision was made. There was no turning back. As the night unfolded, Diana and I sealed our pact, the ink still wet on the metaphorical contract that would bind us. The future loomed, uncertain and dangerous. But in that moment, I could feel the pulse of power. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about becoming the master of the game. The Shadow Network over the following weeks, I worked with Diana to carefully lay the groundwork. We built the Shadow Network, a collection of discrete business fronts, powerful intermediaries, and old connections that had been dormant after Pierce's downfall. Diana was meticulous, a strategist who understood that to rise again, you had to build from the ground up, but with a foundation strong enough to crush anyone who dared challenge you. We had to operate in the shadows, out of sight from the authorities, from the prying eyes of competitors. Old money mixed with new power, weaving a web that extended far beyond the legal reach of even the most diligent investigators. But even as we moved deeper into the underworld, I felt a sense of unease growing within me. There were whispers, small, subtle hints, that not everyone in the network could be trusted. A new betrayal. Looms Diana's ambition was razor-sharp, but it was also reckless. She wanted to expand faster than I was comfortable with, pulling in more players, more risks. There were whispers in the rooms we met, old associates of her father who still operated under the radar, and I knew that many of them weren't fully loyal to Diana. One night, as we sat in a sleek conference room overlooking the city, Diana leaned back in her chair, a glass of champagne in hand. "I've been thinking," she said, her eyes gleaming, "with something dangerous. We need to expand faster. Let's take control of the Eastern markets. I know the right people." I leaned forward, my instincts flaring. "We've already made too many moves too quickly. We need to take it slow, ensure we control our current holdings before we—" She cut me off, her voice icy. "Are you questioning me?" The coldness in her tone sent a chill down my spine. I realized then that Diana was playing a different game than I had anticipated. She wasn't just after power, she was after domination. And in this world, domination meant eliminating anyone who got in your way. The first strike, it started with a whisper, a single, anonymous tip sent to one of our competitors, a major player in the Eastern markets who had been eyeing the same territory we were. The tip? that Diana and I were planning to take over their most valuable asset, a key piece of real estate that would give us control of the entire region. The competitor acted fast, pulling resources, tightening security. But Diana had orchestrated the whole thing. She had used the tip to force their hand, to create chaos and give us the upper hand. I was furious when I found out. The risk was too high, and I had no idea how deep her machinations ran. But when I confronted her, she simply smiled. It's the price of power. Her words cut through me like a knife. The consequences of power, the plan worked, but at a cost. The competitor had moved fast, and we barely avoided a direct confrontation. But we lost allies in the process. The Eastern markets were now ours, but the relationship with our partners became increasingly strained. Trust was becoming a rare commodity in our world. I realized then that while I had played the game of revenge with cold calculation, I had now crossed into a darker realm, one where power meant more than just winning. It meant controlling everything and everyone. The line between ally and enemy had blurred. The turning point one evening, I was alone in my penthouse, staring at the skyline, when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Nathan Cross. We have a problem. Diana's pushing too hard. We need to be ready. The tension in my chest tightened. Nathan had been a steady presence, a voice of reason when I needed it most. But Diana was pulling me deeper into a world that could devour me if I wasn't careful. I called him immediately. I know what's happening, I said. She's pushing everything forward too fast. We need to slow down, regain control. Nathan's voice was calm, but there was a hint of urgency. It's not just about slowing down anymore. It's about surviving. Diana's not just playing the game, she's changing the rules. And if you don't take control back, you won't just lose her. You'll lose everything. A choice in the dark. The decision weighed heavily on me. I had gone so far, torn apart every part of my past, only to step into this world of shadows. And now, the very woman who had promised me power was becoming a threat I could no longer ignore. Diana wasn't just my partner in crime anymore. She had become a rival. The game had shifted. And now, it was clear. I had to decide. Would I let her take the reins? Let her push us into a future where she ruled everything? A dangerous alliance. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The decision weighed heavily on me. There was no going back from this. No undoing the choice I had just made. Diana Pierce was the key to everything now. The power, the influence. The world I had spent my life destroying and rebuilding. But in that world, there was no place for mercy. I had already crossed lines that most people wouldn't dare to approach. But this was a new kind of darkness. The plan unfolds. The following day, Diana sent me the details. A meeting with the most powerful figures in the underground world. There were names I knew, bankers, tech moguls, politicians, and names I didn't. The meeting was to take place in a private location, a warehouse hidden on the outskirts of the city. It was well guarded and carefully planned. The air was thick, with tension as I walked into the space, my mind racing through every possible scenario, every contingency, every outcome. Diana was already there, waiting, her demeanor calm, confident. She gave me a nod of approval when I entered, and a quiet acknowledgement passed between us. This was her world, her turf. But I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was part of it. The others were silent, sizing me up. Some of them looked like they had been here for decades. Others, like me, were newcomers, eager to take a piece of the pie, but what they didn't realize was that they were looking at the wrong person. The game begins. Diana stood up, her eyes scanning the room. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady but powerful, "this is where we begin the real work. No more petty deals. No more small-time operations. It's time to take control." Her words hung in the air. The others seemed to absorb them, weighing their options. I noticed the subtle shift in the room, the way some of them leaned forward, hungry for power, while others held back, calculating. This was a dangerous game, one where trust was fleeting and alliances were formed only when they served a purpose. But I wasn't here to play the same way they were. I had a different game plan, one that had been years in the making. The power. Play as Diana spoke. I moved around the table, my mind calculating every possible move. I knew who the weak links were, who would crack under pressure, who could be bought, who could be manipulated, and I knew exactly what I needed to do to secure my position. Diana was good. She had vision. But she underestimated the one thing that made me different from all the others in that room. I had already won. I glanced at her once more. She was distracted by the other figures, eager to make her pitch. But she didn't see what I saw. I wasn't here to be her pawn. I was here to take her down from within. The first move. The meeting continued, but I was no longer listening to their plans. I was working on mine. I made the rounds, speaking to a few of the key players, subtly planting seeds of doubt about Diana's long-term goals. I painted her as someone who couldn't be trusted, someone who might eventually turn on them. One by one, I watched the reactions. Some were subtle, a flicker of hesitation, a quick glance at Diana. Others were more obvious. But it was when I turned to Lucas Hawthorne, a man who had been with Diana's father for years, that I saw the real opportunity. He had a look in his eyes, the kind of look that came from being on the losing side of a war, from having seen things fall apart before. "You know she's not in control anymore, right?" I asked, my voice low. Hawthorne paused, his gaze narrowing. He wasn't one to show weakness, but I could see the cracks. "I'm not sure what you're implying," he said, his tone guarded. I leaned in closer. "I'm saying that if you don't act now, you'll be left out in the cold. Diana's vision is dangerous, and she'll burn every bridge to get to the top. I know you want to secure your legacy, Hawthorne. I can help you with that." His eyes flashed with interest, but he quickly masked it with a dismissive wave. "We'll see. I'm not easily swayed." I smirked, letting the challenge hang in. The air. He would crack sooner or later. The betrayal. Within that night after the meeting, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Lucas Hawthorne. "I'm in," he said, voice low, urgent. "I've been watching Diana. She's already making moves behind the scenes. I can't let her take everything from me." I smiled. The first domino had fallen. "I knew you'd see reason," I said smoothly. "Now we take action." A world. Of consequences, the weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I became deeply enmeshed in the world I had just entered. Diana and I were working together on the surface, but beneath it, I was carefully pulling strings, positioning myself for the final strike. Hawthorne and I formed a quiet alliance, one that no one saw coming. We began to slowly dismantle Diana's plans from within. She wasn't stupid. She noticed the shift, but by then it was too late. The walls were closing in around her. The final showdown. The fall of Diana Pierce. The night air felt colder than usual as I stood by the window, overlooking the sprawling city below. The lights shimmered like stars scattered across a vast ocean, fragile, beautiful, and ever-shifting. The city seemed so much smaller now, reduced to a chessboard. I had risen to the top, but the climb hadn't been easy. It never was. Diana Pierce had served her purpose. I could feel her presence lingering in the air, even if she wasn't physically in the room. Her ambition had once been a dangerous thing, a force I had sought to control. Now it was a threat I couldn't afford to ignore. The time for manipulation was over. The final move, it was Hawthorne who suggested it. After weeks of working together, aligning our goals, we'd seen enough of Diana's playbook to know her next move. The meeting was set for midnight, in the same warehouse where we had first joined forces. I knew it was dangerous. She would never see this coming, but I also knew that if I didn't end it now, I would risk losing everything. She had to be stopped. I arrived first. The shadows clung to the walls like thick velvet, silent witnesses to everything that had transpired. I didn't feel the familiar rush of adrenaline I once had before confronting an enemy. This time it was different. This time it was personal. The confrontation Diana arrived on time, her steps confident as ever. She didn't seem to sense the shift in the room. "You're late," she said, glancing at the watch on her wrist as if checking to see if I had kept to our appointment. I didn't reply. Instead, I stepped forward, the space between us closing. "Do you think I haven't been watching you?" I asked. My voice was calm, but it carried weight, authority, the kind that only comes when you've already made your decision. She frowned, but it didn't last. She knew I wasn't playing anymore. "You've played your cards well, Jonathan," Diana said, her voice smooth, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind her words. She always had been good at hiding her emotions. A dangerous trait. I wasn't fooled. "Did you really think I'd let you control this game?" I asked. "Let you tear everything down for your own gain?" Diana's expression hardened, the mask slipping slightly. "I've already taken back what's mine. You were a stepping stone. Now it's time for you to step aside." I smiled, cold, calculated. "You're wrong, Diana." Her eyes narrowed. "Am I?" I took a step back, crossing my arms. "You see, you thought I was in this for the same reasons as you: money, power, revenge. But I was always playing a different game, a longer one." The realization hit her a second too late. The trap is set. Hawthorne had already put his plan into motion. The warehouse was surrounded. Security had been compromised, and the backup I had been organizing for weeks had just arrived. Diana's empire, the one she'd worked so hard to rebuild, was about to come crumbling down. She made a move toward the door, but I was faster. "You're not leaving, Diana." My voice was steady, no emotion slipping through the cracks. She paused, glancing at the door, calculating her chances. She was used to manipulating everyone around her, but not today. Today, I controlled the room. The trap had been set. I watched her carefully, her calculating gaze trying to figure out the next step. But there were no more steps for her to take. She was out of options. The revelation. "Do you know why you lost?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't answer, but the challenge in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. "Because you underestimated me," I continued, "and because you never understood the one thing that drives me: survival. I did what was necessary to survive. You didn't. You kept thinking you were invincible, but every empire falls." Her breath caught as the full realization of her fate sank in. "You're finished," I whispered, stepping closer. I could see the fear in her eyes now, the fear that had always been beneath the bravado. Her downfall was inevitable. The consequence of betrayal. Diana was arrested later that night, her connections and wealth no longer enough to save her. Her once powerful network was shattered, her allies scattered, her empire crumbling like dust between her fingers. The charges against her were extensive: fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and the one thing that sealed her fate: the recordings of her plans to take down her own allies, turning on everyone who had ever trusted her. The world she had tried so hard to control had been exposed for the sham it truly was. A new dawn was over. Diana Pierce was no longer a threat. The remnants of her empire were in ruins, and I had ensured that every piece of her past was scrutinized under the harshest light. As for me, I had what I wanted. The city was mine now, my empire, built from the ashes of betrayal. But unlike those who had fallen before me, I had learned to control it, master it, without falling into the same traps of greed and overconfidence.